Hello, I'm Margaret from Blue Monkey Tea Company in Pittsburgh, and in today's presentation in the series Tea Saturdays Live, I will be talking about caffeine. How much caffeine is in your cup of tea? We're going to talk about what is caffeine and how it affects your body, how much caffeine is beneficial and safe for us. I'm going to talk about the actual content of caffeine in various types of tea and coffee. We're going to talk about a couple ways of controlling caffeine intake by doing, there's a couple ways that you can drink the same tea, but you can actually control the amount of caffeine ingested in a way. And then we're going to have time for questions at the end. So what is caffeine? Caffeine is a molecule, basically, that attaches to special receptors in our brain, preventing other enzyme called adenosine from binding. Now, adenosine is a product of the metabolism that when it connects to the receptors in our brain, it makes us sleepy. It basically gives our brain a signal to relax, to rest and sleep. So what happens when you have caffeine molecules in your body? Caffeine actually races to these receptors and blocks them from adenosine, and we stay awake and alert. So there are positive effects of caffeine, as we know, such as increased alertness, endurance, decreased fatigue, and also increased ability to focus. However, depending on what type of caffeine, what type of a beverage you consume, it could be a very short-lasting effect, like literally maybe 20 minutes or so. That's the case with coffee. Caffeine in coffee seems to spike in our system pretty quickly, and then it drops very quickly too. So that's why we are energized, we can focus, we're upbeat, not tired, but then after 20 minutes or so, we kind of become flaccid. So now, in terms of tea, in tea, the metabolism of caffeine is slightly different because it is sort of counteracted by another ingredient in tea called L-theanine. L-theanine, it's an amino acid, which is sort of like I said, counteracting the effects, mostly undesired effects of caffeine. And basically, there's another mechanism. I will talk about this in a little bit. But generally, caffeine in tea, first off, on average, there's only 1/3 of caffeine of coffee in tea. And it also is milder acting caffeine because the absorption of caffeine from tea is much slower in our system than from coffee, but it also takes longer to metabolize the caffeine. So you might still have that caffeine in your system several hours after you drink tea. Caffeine is actually one of the methylxanthine are other stimulants. It's a whole group, okay, of substances, and one of them is caffeine. I'm talking about they're present in coffee. They're also present in tea and a couple other things, but we're talking mostly about tea today. So the other methylxanthines, apart from caffeine, are theobromine and theophylline. I know it's too much, science. I don't think you want to know this, but maybe some of you would like to know. All the methylxanthines, but mostly caffeine, are present in tea plant. I'm going to talk about tea plant right now to ward off, to scare off insects and some animals. But they also account for the bitterness in tea. So all these ingredients, caffeine, theophylline, and theobromine, cause our tea to be bitter. Polyphenols, which are antioxidants, but mostly group called catechins, also will cause our tea to be bitter. I'm not sure, I don't like to use this word, but I just thought for this presentation I will use the word bitter. I'm talking about bitter notes because they're also counteracted by other notes that stem from a presence of other ingredients in tea. So caffeine in general will make your tea, will cause the bitter notes. Polyphenols, antioxidants, also bitter notes. That is especially noticeable in green teas because they have more antioxidants. Now, the amino acids, and I already told you about one amino acid called L-theanine, will give tea umami taste. It's kind of like a brothy, savory taste. And carbohydrates will give tea sweetness. So depending on the amount of these ingredients in particular tea, we end up having teas that taste a little more pungent and some teas that are a little more mellow. And it also depends on the processing. But one big difference between green and black tea, because green teas have unoxidized antioxidants, catechins, they're gonna always have that little bit more pungency, as we know, comparing to black teas, which are oxidized. How much caffeine are we supposed to have to give us those positive effects? So the safe amount of caffeine per day for average adult is 400 to 500 milligrams. 400 to 500 milligrams. For pregnant women, 150 to 200, but it's always good to check with your physician to make sure that's okay, because if it's a high-risk pregnancy, of course, caffeine may not be suitable. And actually, children, if you decide to give your children tea or coffee above 4 years, as long as they're older than 4 years or older, they may have 1 milligram of caffeine per 5.5 pounds body weight. 1 milligram, so very little, but the bigger they get, the more caffeine they are allowed. I think I'm ready to show you something, because this is what it's all about. But before I do that, let me tell you something, and I'm going to show you a little experiment. I have a scale here, and I'm going to weigh a couple different teas. I'm going to weigh Rwanda tea that's processed as CTC, Caterpillar curl, which produces very small chunks, like little bits of tea. And for that, I'm going to need the average amount of tea, as you probably know, or if you don't, I'm going to tell you now, to make a mug of tea that holds about 12 to 14 ounces of water is 4 grams. 4 grams. You don't have to use 4 grams, but that's kind of recommended average amount. God, why are you so slow? Which is approximately 2 teaspoons. But I already measured. This is very, you see, this is a very dense tea. I'm showing you 2 teas to give you an idea what visually 4 grams look like. So we have 4 grams of Rwanda, black tea from Rwanda here. And now let's weigh 4 ounces of silver needle white tea made from buds. I have a little scoop, cute little scoop, weird looking. There. That's 4 grams. Yeah, it is. So, why am I doing this? Because I want to tell you there's a myth that white tea, green tea, they don't have as much caffeine as black tea. But main reason why people think white tea does not have that much caffeine and they don't feel the effects of caffeine when they drink white tea is because they kind of eyeball the amount of tea and use, you probably would not, I don't know if you can see, I'm going to try to show you close. So this is exactly the same amount of tea, 4 grams. Look. One is black tea, Rwanda, small cut, and one is silver needle white tea. So if we, let's say, just kind of estimate, on average, you probably would only use half of this tea, because visually you would think this is about the right amount. And no wonder it's going to have less caffeine because it's just less tea, right? So that's one of the reasons why people think that white tea might have less caffeine. But ladies and gentlemen, all tea comes from the same plant, Camellia sinensis. Not a very good picture, but you probably all know more or less what it looks like because I showed a picture of tea plant in many classes. Tea plant is called Camellia sinensis, and all tea, whether it's black, green, oolong, white, and so on, will have approximately the same amount of caffeine. There are small differences between types of tea, but nothing significant. So if you actually use a scale, and it's good to have a gram scale because it's very hard to measure small quantities in ounces, you will realize exactly how much tea you are supposed to use per cup. Okay, now I can go to my sheet here. I'm going to show you how much caffeine is up, and I will show it one more time later and probably take a picture maybe and post it on Facebook. So how much caffeine these beverages have in one mug. I'm talking one mug, which is about 12 to 14 ounces of liquid. many tea companies and in cooking recipes, there is a measure cup. Cup is actually only about 7-8. Official cup in cooking is 8 ounces, but little cup that we use, for a fancy tea party, it also may only have 5, 6, maybe 7 ounces. So you use proper amount of tea to be used per mug is actually 2 teaspoons, but with some teas it's best to weigh them. So on average 2 teaspoons of tea per mug, and this is a cup. 1 teaspoon per cup of dry tea leaves, and 2 teaspoons per mug. White tea, probably 4 teaspoons. Okay, so coffee. I also have coffee here. Coffee, this mug of coffee probably has about 240 milligrams of caffeine. Tea, depending, like I said, there isn't that much difference. On average, a mug of tea will have about 70 to 80 milligrams of caffeine. Now, decaffeinated tea, it's too bad I don't see my signs, but decaf, this is decaf Ceylon tea, also decaf coffee, they will have up to 3% of the original caffeine content. During the process of decaffeination, almost all caffeine is gone, but there's always a tiny little bit of caffeine left. And that's up to 3% of the original content. We also have Yerba Mate. That is not a tea plant. It's a totally different plant. And I have a class about Yerba Mate, if you are interested. Shut up, Google. Okay. So once again, approximately amount in coffee, in 1 mug of coffee, there's about 240 milligrams of caffeine. In tea, only about 70 to 100. Decaffeinated tea and coffee will have up to 3% of the original caffeine content. Yerba Mate. Yerba Mate is not a tea. It's not Camellia sinensis. It's a different plant. And Yerba Mate is known for high caffeine content. Approximately 170 milligrams of caffeine if you use 2 teaspoons or 4 grams of Yerba Mate. Chamomile, 0. It's an herb. It's not a tea plant. It's not Yerba Mate. So no caffeine at all. 0. The same with other herbs like hibiscus, peppermint, and Rooibos. It's a red tea. We have right here in front of me. Rooibos, otherwise called red bush, also 0, null, no caffeine at all, because it's a different plant. We call it a tea, red tea or Rooibos tea, but actually it's made from a different plant than tea, and it has no caffeine. So maybe we should set them up in order, but before let's do that. So coffee will have the most caffeine. Yerba Mate will be second. Then we're going to have, let's put this white tea here, and I'm going to tell you why in a minute. Then we're going to have Rwanda. Dragon Well, green tea. Tikwanin will be next. It's a oolong. And we will have decaffeinated tea, because like I said, there's a tiny little bit of caffeine in that. Hibiscus, caffeine free. It's just a different plant. And Rooibos, no caffeine at all. I'm gonna hold this for a little longer. I'm in the mood to drink them all. Okay, one more thing. You all probably wonder how much caffeine is in matcha. Matcha, can I have a tin of matcha, please? Matcha is a powdered tea, and because they use the whole leaf, it's ground leaf of tea, as you know, it's very, very concentrated. Of course, if I can weigh it and figure out more or less the caffeine content. You just have to keep in mind that matcha is about 4 times concentrated tea. So you basically multiply like if you have 4 grams of matcha, you would have to multiply by, let's say, maybe 70, 80 milligrams. But don't drink that much. It's going to be a lot of caffeine in that. So the recommended amount of matcha is about half a teaspoon. Half teaspoon. I want to show you one more item that also contains caffeine. It's a chocolate. There's caffeine in milk chocolate and in dark chocolate. There's no caffeine in white chocolate because it doesn't really have cocoa. But 1 ounce of chocolate, which is about 1/3 of this bar, contains about 20 milligrams of caffeine. So not a whole lot, but hey, if you eat chocolate before bedtime and you cannot fall asleep, that's why. There are small differences in caffeine content in teas depending on the cultivar, the size of the leaf, and so there's a couple different, like there's Camellia sinensis and Camellia sinensis assamica, which grows in Assam region, and because Assamica has a little bigger leaves, so they're thinner, the caffeine content and content of all the other goodies in tea will be smaller per weight. Also, young tea plants, like so-called first flush, so leaves that grow early in the spring, they're loaded with everything because the plant was dormant during the winter, and all the juices, all the nutrients, all the ingredients are pumped into those new leaves. So those fresh leaves, the first peak of the season or first few peaks of the season, those leaves also going to have a little more caffeine as well. The same with tips. Like the younger the leaves, or if it's just the buds, like on this in the silver needle white tea, they're actually going to have a little more caffeine because it's the way of defending themselves from those insects. Those tips, buds, and those young leaves, they're much more yummier to insects, so they also produce more caffeine, and that's why, ladies and gentlemen, believe it or not, but the white tea, where do we have white tea? Right here, silver needle, is actually going to have more caffeine, a little more caffeine than a black tea. Am I correct? This is black tea. Ha! Did you know that? And also, let's see what else. There's one tea. Can I have cookie jar, please? If you would like the benefit of green tea, maybe it's here somewhere. Yeah, I have it. This is very interesting tea. It's a green tea from Japan. It's called cookie jar. And it's very It's a tea made of twigs, not leaves, and therefore contains much less caffeine than a regular green tea. So if you're looking for benefits of green tea, a kukicha might be a tea for you. Benefits of green tea and less caffeine, kukicha might be a tea for you. Kukicha. 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 There's also a little less caffeine in Tiquanine oolongs. Tiquanine oolong, because lower leaves, usually only 2 top leaves and a bud are used in making tea, to processing tea to be consumed. With Tiquanine, I have a jar here somewhere. It's okay. I thought I have a jar here. It's here. It's called Iron Goddess of Mercy, or Tiquanine. These teas are made also using 3rd and 4th leaf. Normally, most teas are just made from 2 top leaves and a bud, and those leaves have more of everything, including caffeine. And 3rd and 4th leaf, because they're bigger and thinner, the more diluted in a way, therefore they have less of the caffeine. But the differences are not that remarkable. I'd say if you want to have benefits of tea and no caffeine at all, either opt for decaffeinated green tea. We have decaffeinated sencha, for example. And speaking of decaffeination process, these days there are 2 decaffeination processes used. One of them is using ethylene acetate, and the other one is using supercritical carbon dioxide. Basically, my understanding is that supercritical carbon dioxide becomes a liquid, and it's mixed with tea leaves, and they kind of bathe in that solution for a few hours, and then it is removed. The caffeine will dissolve in the liquid, in the CO2, and then the whole thing is removed. But like, remember what I said, there might be still up to 3% of the original caffeine content. And actually, these two they used to have used the method with methylene chloride, I think, but they don't. It was not a very good method. It was also removing other ingredients from tea or coffee. Now, these 2 methods, and especially the CO2 method, are very good because they allow to keep all the other goodies in your tea, and the taste is actually not affected. If you try this decaf sencha, and I wouldn't tell you it's decaf, you probably wouldn't even know. The same with, we have very good decaf, black tea, decaf Ceylon Court Lodge, right here. How else you can control amount of caffeine? Oh, so you can also opt for Rooibos. Rooibos is a wonderful herb, wonderful so-called tea, because it's not made from a real tea plant. It's made from Aspalathus linearis. It's a completely different plant. It only grows in South Africa. It's loaded with antioxidants, minerals, vitamins, and it's totally caffeine free. But what's the best thing about it? It looks and has a body texture almost like a regular black tea, and makes delicious iced tea as well. So the myths are, And a lot of people assume that the darker the tea, the more caffeine. But apart from coffee that's really dark here, you see these two teas are much lighter than this, and actually they have less caffeine. I'm sorry, I put Yerba Mate here. So this has caffeine, this has this tea, okay, this tea has more caffeine. Oh yeah, these two actually are a perfect example in showing you how white tea actually has a little more caffeine than the black tea. So the color of tea, the beverage, it doesn't really tell you about whether the tea is stronger, has more caffeine. It might taste stronger, it has more body, but in terms of caffeine, there isn't that much difference to start with. Okay, and how to control your intake of caffeine, amount of leaves. Yes, you can make your tea a little lighter, so you will have less caffeine. You can use 1 teaspoon of tea per mug instead of 2. But we like our tea strong, right? Also, steeping tea in a lower temperature. For green and white teas and oolong, lighter oolongs, the temperature should be a little cooler. So steeping in a little lower temperature will extract less caffeine. And also cold brew. Cold brew might be a way to go, because this actually will extract less caffeine as well. And the time, like if you, generally the time of steeping does not affect, some people say that if you steep for like a minute or so, it will, and dump the first steep, it will remove most of the caffeine, but you're taking a risk of removing all the other goodies from your tea. And if you do it very quickly, yes, they say up to 70% of the caffeine can be removed, but generally it's a controversial method, and I promise I will study better, because I heard a lot of different opinions on this decaffeination method. Has anybody used that? Has anybody here decaffeinated their tea by dumping the first steeping and quickly and then steeping again? But speaking of re-steeping, you know, many oolongs and green teas, you can pu'er tea, you can steep many times, and then of course the next steep, third steep, fourth steep, they're going to have less and less caffeine, or practically no caffeine at all. I think I would like to maybe say a few more words about Yerba Mate for people who actually would like to have more caffeine. And caffeine in Yerba Mate is also it's the same caffeine as in tea and coffee, but it because of the combination of other ingredients like theophylline, theobromine, the metabolism of caffeine from Yerba Mate in human body is different. It's much more, it's slower, it's less harsh, and people who drink Yerba Mate, they don't experience jitteriness, anxiety, shakes. In fact, it's very popular with Yerba Mate is popular among the tattoo artists because their hands don't shake. And the other tea that has quite a bit of caffeine, not the actual tea, is called guayusa. We have guayusa. Yes, it's called guayusa. It's nice and strong tasting, because Yerba Mate, I love Yerba Mate, but guayusa has a little more body and, guayusa. So just to sum up, all teas, because all teas that are made from a true tea plant, which is white, green, oolong, black. There's also a couple other teas like yellow tea and purple tea, but less known. They're going to have about the same amount of caffeine because they come from the same plant. There'll be slight differences depending on maybe the cultivar, but generally the age of the leaf. The younger leaves, buds, are going to have a little more caffeine because they want to defend themselves from insects by producing more caffeine, which is bitter. Also, there'll be slight difference in oolongs. Oolong teas, the particular tea, Kuan Yin, otherwise called Iron Goddess, will have a little less caffeine because they use third and fourth leaf. So those leaves are thinner, like more kind of watered down, and they have less of everything, also caffeine. So this tea is going to have less caffeine. And the other tea that I mentioned today was kokicha, a twig tea. I don't know exactly how much less, but I know it's quite a difference between regular tea made from leaves and kokicha, which is made from twigs. And if you want to have benefit of tea without much of the caffeine or no caffeine at all, you may want to drink decaf green tea, like decaf sencha. We have also decaf jasmine green tea, or decaf black teas, which are also beneficial, but not as much as green tea. Or you can totally opt for Rooibos. Rooibos magic tea, not real tea, herb from South Africa, otherwise called red tea. No caffeine at all. Or you can just use herbs, flowers like hibiscus, chamomile, leaves like peppermint. Thank you so much for watching. This was Margaret from Blue Monkey Tea Company in Pittsburgh. Have a great day. Drink tea. Stay healthy.